I think it's quite unusual to do an exhibition in a solo exhibition in a major gallery like this twice in a lifetime. But I think Pat had thought the work had changed so much that it was almost like a new, it's definitely a new body of work.
But it is quite an evolution, because back then there was a teenage suicide. That was one of the paintings, and a crime scene, and a sort of a murder scene, crime of passion. And they were quite violent in their own ways, and there were sort of dead bodies, and then there's an evolution that you get even more dead bodies, and then you even get to Jack the Ripper in the through that period, and now we're into a period where it's called Child, and it's reasonably gentle show in comparison to it's worth saying that those early works were straitjackets, medical chairs, for instance, with no bodies, and there were very few bodies, and these were objects suspended almost in the middle of the canvas.
Colour fields.
And then there were those patterns of stripes that take it right to the edge. And then that's quite an evolution to now in some ways. It can be traced through if you're sort of really following the work, but this seems very different in that they do seem very domestic. They at first seem very gentle and very beautiful, and they seem to have much less connection to the very hard, physical, medical kind of power control things you're looking at. But in a sense, I sense there is a sort of move from that to this. And how would you relate them, the two?
Well, earlier when I went when Sandy Moffat accepted me for the MFA program at Glasgow School of Art, I had never done painting. I did a lot of drawing, I did a lot of life drawing. I studied as an art and design course, general art and design, so I was supposed to be doing book jackets. I wasn't very good at it. I loved graphics, I wasn't very good at that either. And all my tutors as an undergraduate always said, you should be doing fine art, you're really a painter, but I wasn't trained as a painter. When I got to Glasgow School of Art, I was on the MFA program, which was multidiscipline, so I was with people who were making conceptual art and sculpture and photography, and a couple of painters also who were very, very good. And I just kind of learned a bit from all of them. It was a kind of bit of a mix. So my paintings had a bit of a mix from all of it, my graphic and art and design background, conceptual artists, sculptors, and photographers. And I've always worked from photographs, archival imagery. So I never really I would never really want to sit and, as nice as this is, I would never want to sit and paint that. I may in the future, I've never wanted to so far sit and paint that from plein air painting, as it were. So it's a kind of combination of all those things. But when you think of it, in 1988, when I went to art school, I finished at 1990, and I started showing professionally at that point. And at 93, I was in the Venice Biennale, with Christine Borland and Damien Hirst. But I'd actually only had a couple of years, a few years painting by that point. I think we're going to have to put some kind of slight brown in, because that wall's so brown. Might try because there's cream in the wall. You always have to mix a bit of the colour into the colour you're using to kind of tone it in and touch. That's quite like it now, isn't it? Because we can always go on top with a bit more of that. Spots and touch, that'll be helpful. I've always learned from a really harsh criticism in a magazine or something, which my dealer would say, "Oh, that's not right," and I say, "No, actually, that's how I learn things." If someone says, "Watch, they don't get too pretty," or and then I thought, well, that's fine. If they get too pretty, I'll make them tougher but even prettier. It's like they can get more pretty, but the subject has to even be more tougher, maybe. Somebody once said to me in a restaurant, "You're drunkenly lurched over," and said, "The trouble with you is you don't deal with the corners of your painting," and I was really upset. But actually, I thought about it for such a long time, and I thought, they're right, I don't. Someone else said, "No, she does. She even paints around the edges of them, she's that concerned with the corners." But actually, they were right. I wasn't dealing with the corners. What they were saying is that the work was very repetitive. Where do you go from just having one singular image stuck in the middle of a canvas, formulaic? You could go forever just painting, but you can't. You have to evolve and change. And it was a great thing that they said to me, and the fact that I got so incensed about it really meant something. And that's when I slowly started creeping towards the edge of the canvas.
Many of your carpets have folds. And at one point you've got a dead body under one of the folds.
Yes.
But then you do two kind of key paintings, one of Darwin's study and one of Freud's couch.
Yeah.
And again there are folds there.
Yeah.
And then it comes up again in the Montessori painting downstairs.
Yeah. Oh yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
It just keeps turning up.
Yeah.
And it sort of seems at some point almost to be a sort of crime. And it's a sort of repetition, almost as you say about this following something through.
Yes.
Almost in a sort of genetic way, this fold keeps going through your paintings.
I think also when I was a child we had this kind of disruptive family life. I think the fold in the carpet is the disruption that we all have in our life at some point, unless you're very lucky and you have the kind of charmed life. I've never met anyone who's had that yet, but someone must. But this kind of disruption in one's own life and dealing with it and how you deal with it and how you live with it, and now it's normal and part of your life. When my dad would be disruptive at home, often the police would turn up and there'd be this, you know, this kind of excitement of the police coming in, and then that I remember walking into the living room and it'd be this deathly silence, and it'd be like this pervading silence, which I think's in all of my work. There's a kind of pervading silence on everything. It's like it's a kind of vapor that's over everything, the early gynecological or medical. You know, it's like walking into a medical or into a hospital theatre. There's that kind of pervading silence, and it's also in an artist studio as well. It's kind of, it's where something's going to happen, or in a theatre, it's where something's going to happen, or in my life story, it's where something had just happened, and then it's the silence afterwards. I remember a friend of mine, a student friend of mine, said, "Oh, you're a bit angry," and you know there was that anger and rage, but most of the time it went into the work, and pretty much all the time. But you know, the odd person, I suppose, who got close enough to you would see it and feel it, and you know, it was a long time till I accepted that that's what the energy for the work. You know, part of that was kind of, I suppose, anger. A lot of kids who've had disruptive childhoods have very angry adolescents, and I kind of almost put mine off. You know, I kind of, and I think in a way I stored all mine up, and it went into my work. You know. You know, I was worried the paint wasn't going to last. Shall I turn it off a sec? Yeah. It's nice because it doesn't just come down in the middle, it comes down towards the end, so it's not, it's, you know, kind of slightly off centre, which is nice.
But it's kind of, once you go to the 50s and 60s, you finally kind of meet yourself.
Yes,
because we then get kind of a young Julie turning up in some of the paintings as well, and your father, and members of the family. Yeah. So there's kind of, you've worked into that, but also a different history of art. Very British history of art in some ways. It's kind of echoed in a lot of the works. We were talking about Barbara Hepworth earlier, and she seemed important within that, and Piper as well, in these small paintings over here.
You know, I did my drawings of the Jack the Ripper, the portraits of Jack the Ripper victims, and they came. I showed them that we had to have a studio opening, and I showed them on the wall, put them on the walls, and they were all saying, yes, it's a particular British style, like Lucian Freud and Francis Bacon, and I was really thrilled, you know, because I thought, oh, good, I'm part of that continuation. I really, and also with Barbara Hepworth, with the hole in the sculpture, and the fact that she did it first, but then. Henry Moore got famous for it. It's like, you know, but it's like a lot of things. You know, it takes women a lot longer to find their fame, to earn their fame. But I think when they get it, that's, you know, they've got it forever then. And I think all those things finally come out in the wash anyway.
There's something nice about just using these colours, isn't there? They're very calming and just. They all complement each other. They all sort of nice sort of colour harmonies going on.
So how did you know that it was that portrait?
But I mean, you could put any on, but I just think Edna's more subtle in a way.
Yeah.
She's a little bit more. There's less of it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
She's kind of much more basic than some of the others. You know, she's just little head and shoulders shot. The others have got things, dolls.
Like, props.
Props, yeah. She's kind of. This is her prop, I suppose.
Yeah.
And actually when I paint like a surgeon. I paint the backgrounds, then I let it dry, do something else, come back, cover it up with glassine paper. and then I start painting in another section, and I get to the point where there's just a little head left or a hand, and they're just, oh, there'll be, everything's painted, there's a little hole left in the painting still for the head and the hands, and they're the last things that go in, and then the absolute last thing that goes in is that white line, and then the painting, then you take it off and you go, and I don't know it until I've finished the last bit and they take it all off whether it's worked or not. But I know that I can trust myself that it more than likely will, because I don't make that many paintings, and I think about them for sometimes years before I paint them. I'll have the research material, and I always trust now that my unconscious will work absolutely every bit out for me. So, but I do work like a little surgeon on the painting.